everyone! Today we are extremely happy to share a challenging interview with the director of the film 58. Let us welcome Neeves. Tim, as the director of Prospect Arts, you have worked with several organizations that serve the poor around the world. Tell us what are the faces of poverty that have broken your heart the most, and why?
That is a very good question. I think one of the hardest things that I've seen over the last few years of filming was probably in India, which was in the film 58, which was the story of the family working in the quarry. And bonded labour is just such a harsh system that oppresses the poor. And in that community, the most vulnerable, the children, were also trapped, having to work very hard every day, breaking rocks in the searing heat. And I think when we talked with the young children, hearing the absolute lack of hope that those kids had. The younger ones were kind of very childlike, and they probably didn't really know what was going on so much. But then, once they got a little older, so there was a 12-year-old boy called Morty, who, he just said, I have dreams, but what's the point really? Because they're never going to come true. This is all I'm good for. And that is just something that really, really broke all of our hearts. And, I often hear the sound of those breaking rocks in my mind, when I go to sleep at night every now and then. But that was really hard, and I think, so one of the other things that I've really struggled with also is the spiritual poverty, because you see in those kind of communities, like in the quarry, they don't have a faith in God, well, in our God, in the faith in Jesus. The other area of poverty that has really impacted me, and I've really noticed over the years, is the lack of sort of spiritual life, really. I was in Nepal a few years ago, and this family were very poor, but they weren't really any poorer than many other families we've filmed. In fact, in some senses, they were probably better off than many families that we filmed with compassion. But because they didn't have a faith in Jesus, they just seemed so hopeless. And I think that's, is very, very saddening. In fact, I would say incredibly depressing, actually. I remember we sat and interviewed this family for about an hour and a half, and they just had no hope. And yet they were receiving benefits from an organisation, but I think because they didn't have that sort of sense of hope in faith in Jesus, they couldn't really continue. And they were saying, what good is all of this? We can't live. And we're thinking, well, you just need Jesus. And I think that is that's really hard. And I think that's, when you see families like in Ethiopia, when we were filming with 58, this woman was in terrible, terrible poverty, one of the poorest people I've ever met, yet she had this faith in Jesus that helped her through it all. And I think that was so uplifting, whilst very sad and tremendously difficult to film, because there was death on the face of so many in the community. That woman, she had a faith in Jesus, which gave her life, and she talked about that, and she said, if I could meet Jesus, I would just want to bow down at his feet and praise him. I have all I need. Incredibly humbling.
And yes, talking about poverty, Prospect Arts is the producer of the film 58, based on Isaiah 58. What is this film all about, and what was its main purpose?
If you want to find out about what our film 58 was about, the best place to go is the Bible and Isaiah chapter 58. And our vision, along with some of the guys over at Compassion International, was to produce a film that would inspire, awaken, shake up, and motivate the church globally to seek God and his will on our lives. What does God call us to be to a hurting world? And so we looked at Isaiah 58. That was the original vision. And it comes in three parts. The first part is where the prophet Isaiah is basically shouting at the followers of God, saying, shout it aloud, do not hold back. And he talked about how they were oppressing their workers. And then he goes on to say, is this not the kind of fasting that I've chosen to, loose the bands of wickedness, to clothe the naked and to feed the hungry, to set the oppressed free. And those are the things that we as followers of God are called to do. And then he goes on to this, these wonderful promises of, when you do these things, God will shine his light on you, and you'll be like a well-watered garden, and you'll be rebuilding those ancient walls that were once in ruin. And these wonderful promises that are so exciting. So we wanted to use that chapter, which is, one of my favourite chapters in the Bible, to tell stories that would, I suppose, shine light on the church, and so often church can be so kind of inward looking into I often think of churches with the mirrors, looking in on ourselves, when actually we want the church to be looking outwards, and God is saying, you need to spend yourself on behalf of the poor. And we didn't want to produce a film that was depressing and one of those typical poverty films. We wanted to do one that told stories with utter integrity, and with uplifting messages of hope of what we can actually do and what we can achieve in bringing hope and life to people who are suffering.
There are most certainly many stories you could share about the impact that 58 is already having around the world. Please share one of the most outstanding ones with us.
We've had so many really encouraging messages that have come through the Live 58 office and Compassion over in the UK, and actually further afield as well. Lots of stories from church pastors who've said, we were a little bit nervous about showing this film and how it might impact giving for our church, whether it would take giving away from our church. And many stories of how our church is, the income through tithing has gone way up. We've also started doing this and that in the community, and we've set up a mission over in Guatemala. But I think for me, one of the most exciting things is how unexpected the 58 movement has been. And I don't think we'll ever know the true impact of this film and the stories within it. But just as an example of those unexpected moments, we had a message that came through from a pastor in Kathmandu in Nepal, who somehow got a copy of the film, was moved by it, decided to show his congregation. And they were in a poor community in the city there. And that whole community of their church were really moved to go out onto the streets and start handing out blankets and hot meals to the poor people, people living on the streets. And that for me is surprising and very exciting. I think our first, I suppose our initial thoughts that this film might make an impact in the US and maybe the UK and maybe other parts of Europe and Australia, but to think that it somehow got to Kathmandu, and it's been in Kenya and various other countries as well, doing things. It's very exciting.
Because this film is having such an impact, Prospect Arts has already subtitled or dubbed it in several languages. In fact, we know that right now you are in the process of dubbing it in another language. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, this week has been tremendously exciting. We've been overdubbing the film into Spanish, and it's been a fun time trying to fit all the words in. Spanish is often more words than in English, and some of the speakers in the film were so fast that I was amazed to hear some of these voiceover artists speaking like a machine. It was amazing, so fast. But for me, it's really exciting to think that this film is going to, have impact in a whole other continent. South America, Latin America is utterly vast, and the church here has so much potential. And I feel really excited to think this film is going to be able to be used to, encourage, motivate, wake up, shake up, and inspire the church here in South America to reach out to the vulnerable, fast, pray, Yeah, it's very cool.
And finally, would you share with our audience how we can truly live 58?
Wow. For me, I think to know what it really means to live 58 is to, first of all, I think fast and pray and give. So I think fasting, that could be literally fasting food, and which I think is obviously a good spiritual discipline, but it's also a really good way of physically putting yourself in a position that helps you focus your prayer on those who have less than you. But it could be fasting other things like technology, time of technology and things like that. And praying, obviously, asking God, what do you want me to do? Read Isaiah 58 and meditate on it. And God will tell you exactly what you need to do. And then the third thing is to give, giving of your time, and giving of your resources. And I think it can often be a challenge, particularly in a busy world. Time is actually one of the more difficult things to give, actually. But I think, there's poor people all around us, poor economically, but also poor spiritually and emotionally. And I think that, we can do so much, just opening our eyes to those who are around us, not just, way off in other countries around the world, but in our communities. It could be in your community, you've got an old people's home with, vulnerable adults who just need some love and some care. Or it could be that you've got, some poor children in your neighbourhood, or poor families, single mothers who are desperate in need of affection and maybe help with going to get the groceries, putting their children to bed, all those kind of things. That you've got drug addicts and homeless people in your community and people who struggle with alcoholism. There are so many people who are in desperate need of love and care and help, and God is calling us to do something about it. So that's my encouragement to people who watch this film, read Isaiah 58, ask God, what does he want you to do, and then just go for it.